Lei è solo un giocattolo. She is nothing but a toy. Vincent Romano whispered in Italian, his hand clamped around Lauren's wrist, hard enough to leave marks laughing into his mistress's ear while his wife stood inches away. He thought she understood nothing. He thought 8 years of marriage had produced a woman too blind and too grateful to see what was right in front of her. He was wrong about every single thing. Lauren understood every word. She felt the bruise forming on her wrist. And by 4 in the morning she was gone, carrying everything she needed to bring his entire empire to the ground. Subscribe, comment your city below, and stay until the very end. The gala had been Vincent Romano's idea, as most things were. He had chosen the venue, a converted midtown ballroom that charged $12,000 a night just to open its doors, and he had chosen the guest list, the menu, the centerpieces, the band. He had even chosen Lauren's dress, a deep emerald, that he said brought out her eyes. Though Lauren had noticed long ago that Vincent rarely looked at her eyes anymore. He looked at her the way he looked at everything he owned quickly, to confirm it was still there, and then away again, already moving on to the next thing that required his attention. That night, Lauren stood beside him in the receiving line and smiled at each arriving guest with the practiced warmth that 8 years of marriage had made second nature. She shook hands. She laughed at jokes she had heard before. She accepted compliments about her dress, her hair, her composure, and she redirected every question about herself back toward Vincent, because that was what the evening required, and Lauren had always understood what was required of her. Vincent was in exceptional form. He moved through the room the way water moves, filling every space, finding every opening, arriving exactly where he needed to be before anyone realized he was coming. His voice was warm and unhurried, a low baritone that carried authority without effort. When Vincent Romano spoke, people leaned in. They always had. "You're remarkable," his lawyer Gerald Hess had told her once early in the marriage, when Lauren had smoothly redirected a conversation that was veering toward a topic Vincent needed to avoid. "You anticipate everything." She had smiled and said nothing, because anticipating everything was what kept the machinery running, and she had learned by then that the machinery needed to run quietly. Tonight, the machinery was running well. The charity raised over $2 million in the first hour. Vincent's associates congratulated him. City council members shook his hand. A state senator laughed too hard at one of his jokes. Natalie Brooks, Vincent's executive assistant, circulated through the room with a tablet and a headset coordinating logistics with the silent efficiency that made her indispensable. And Lauren had observed with growing unease over the past several months, increasingly close to Vincent in ways that went beyond logistics. Lauren watched Natalie the way she watched most things, carefully without appearing to watch at all. Natalie was younger than Lauren by 6 years. She was capable and focused and possessed of a particular quality that Lauren had spent considerable time trying to name. It was not beauty exactly, though Natalie was attractive. It was something more like availability, the sense that she existed entirely in relation to Vincent's needs, that she had no edges he might accidentally cut himself on. She laughed when he was funny. She anticipated when he was hungry. She disappeared when he needed privacy and reappeared when he needed to look organized. Lauren had been that person once. She recognized the shape of the role the way you recognize an old coat you used to wear. At 8:15, Vincent leaned toward her and said in that pleasant, distracted voice he used when he was managing her, "You should go say hello to the Delgados. Maria was asking about you." And Lauren understood that this was not a suggestion, but a dismissal, gentle as his dismissals had become over the years, but a dismissal nonetheless. He needed her somewhere else. She moved without protest. She found Maria Delgado near the bar, and they talked for 20 minutes about Maria's daughter's graduate program and a trip Maria was planning to Portugal, and Lauren was engaged and warm and genuinely interested, because Lauren had always been capable of genuine interest in other people, which was something Vincent had never fully understood about her. He assumed her warmth was performance. He had never once considered that it might simply be who she was. At 9:30, Lauren slipped away from the main hall to find a quiet moment. The noise and the lights and the hours of sustained performance had begun to wear on her in a way she refused to let show publicly. She needed 2 minutes of stillness. She found a corridor near the private offices that ran along the east side of the building, a carpeted hallway with low lighting and the distant muffled sound of the band drifting through the walls. She was not looking for anything. She was not following anyone. She was simply walking toward a moment of silence when she heard Vincent's voice behind the door at the end of the hall. She stopped, not because she was suspicious. She had learned to manage her suspicions over years of practice, but because something in the tone of his voice reached through the door and held her absolutely still. He was speaking Italian. Rapid, relaxed, familiar Italian, the kind he only used with his oldest associates, the kind he had never bothered to teach her because it had never occurred to him that she might understand. That was his first mistake. Lauren had spent 2 years in Florence during her late 20s. She had studied Italian formally for 4 years before that, drawn to the language by her father's love of opera. She was not fluent in the specialized vocabulary of Vincent's business. She did not know the particular slang of the men he had grown up with, but she understood the language the way she understood music. She heard it beneath the surface. She caught its meaning before its words. The voice with Vincent's was a woman's, Natalie. "È andata alla grande stanotte," Natalie was saying. "It went beautifully tonight." Vincent laughed, a full, unguarded laugh that Lauren had not heard directed at her in at least 2 years. "Certo che sì, avevo tutto sotto controllo." Of course it did. I had everything under control. There was a pause, and then Natalie's voice again, lower now, a question with a specific shape. Lauren heard her own name. Lauren shaped into the sentence like a stone dropped into water. And she heard Vincent's answer. "Lei è solo un giocattolo." She's just a toy. "Qualcosa di bello da tenere in mostra, ma I giocattoli si rompono." Something beautiful to display. But toys break. Lauren did not move. "E dopo?" Natalie asked. "And then si sostituiscono," Vincent said. "They get replaced." Another pause. And then in a quieter voice that managed to be somehow more careless than anything before it, "Mi ha aiutato a crescere, ma adesso sa troppo poco e sente troppo." She helped me grow, but now she knows too little and feels too much. The sentence landed in Lauren's chest with a physical weight. She knows too little and feels too much. She stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds. After that she counted them, because counting was something to do with the part of her mind that needed to be occupied, while the rest of it processed what had just happened, and then she turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Her face showed nothing. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even and controlled. Inside something had gone very quiet. Not the quiet of nothing, but the quiet of everything rearranging itself around a new center of gravity. The quiet of tectonic plates, shifting miles underground, invisible to anyone standing on the surface, catastrophic in slow motion. She returned to the main hall. She found Maria Delgado again and finished the conversation about Portugal. She accepted a glass of water from a passing server. She smiled at Gerald Hess and asked about his grandchildren. She located Vincent across the room and let her eyes rest on him for a long moment. His broad shoulders, his easy confidence, the way the room organized itself around him without his having to ask. And she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not heartbreak, not rage, clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives not when something is broken, but when you finally completely understand that it was never what you thought it was. A sudden unsealing. A veil lifted not dramatically, but simply. Here is the thing just as it is without the story you built around it. Vincent Romano had called her a toy, and in doing so, he had made the single most consequential mistake of his life. Because Lauren Whitaker had not spent 8 years simply supporting a man. She had spent 8 years learning everything about him. She arrived home at 11:15 that night, 40 minutes before Vincent, because he had told her to go ahead. "You look tired. Go rest." And she had agreed again without protest, because she understood that agreeing was now a strategy rather than a habit. She changed out of the emerald dress. She made herself a cup of tea she did not drink. She sat at the small writing desk in the corner of the study that had always been hers alone, the only corner of the apartment that felt unambiguously like her own territory, and she began to think, not emotionally, methodically. She pulled out the small leather notebook she kept in the desk's bottom drawer, old battered her father's handwriting on the first few pages, before her own took over, and she began to write. She wrote in the compact, organized shorthand she had developed during her years as a financial investigator, the years before Vincent, the years she had set aside, because she believed love was a better use of her particular set of skills. She had been wrong about that, but she was not going to be wrong about what came next. The truth was that Lauren had noticed things for a long time. She had noticed them and filed them away in the part of her mind that never stopped working even when she was trying to be simply a wife, simply a partner, simply the woman on Vincent Romano's arm at charity galas. That part of her mind did not know how to stop. It was the part that had made her extraordinary at her former work. The ability to observe without appearing to observe, to remember without appearing to attend, to understand the significance of small things before anyone else recognized them as significant at all. She had noticed the second phone Vincent kept in the lining of his winter coat. She had noticed the pattern of his late-night phone calls, the frequency, the timing, the particular days of the week they clustered on. She had noticed the name of the offshore account that appeared in the corner of a document he had left open on the kitchen table one morning and quickly closed when he saw her looking, not realizing that she had already read it, already stored it, already placed it in the mental file she maintained without entirely meaning to. She had noticed the way Natalie Brooks had changed in the past 8 months, the shift in her posture around Vincent, the new quality of familiarity in the way she managed his calendar, the fact that she had begun traveling with him on trips that Lauren had in earlier years always attended. She had noticed all of it, and she had ignored it because ignoring things was what love required sometimes, and she had believed she was choosing love. Now she understood she had been choosing blindness. She heard Vincent come in at 10 minutes past midnight. She heard him in the kitchen, the familiar sound of the refrigerator opening a glass being set on the counter. She heard him moving toward the bedroom. She heard him pause outside the study door, and then after a moment move on. He did not check on her. He never did anymore. She worked through the night. By 2 a.m, she had filled 6 pages of the notebook. By 3, she had moved from the notebook to the small personal laptop she kept in the same desk drawer, not connected to any of their shared accounts, not linked to any of the devices. Vincent's IT security team managed a laptop she had purchased for cash 2 years ago on an afternoon when something in her gut had told her without specific evidence that she might eventually need a space he couldn't see into. She had told herself at the time that she was being paranoid. She had kept the laptop anyway. Now she opened it and began to work in earnest. She knew the names of Vincent's 3 primary holding companies. She knew the names of the law firms he used and the accounting firms that managed his legitimate finances. She had a general understanding of the structure of his real estate portfolio and a more specific understanding of at least 2 transactions that had never quite added up. Numbers that didn't reconcile partners whose names appeared and disappeared. Money that moved in patterns she had once tried to ask about and been gently, firmly redirected away from. She had not forgotten those patterns. She had simply waited. At 3:15, she found something she had not expected. She had logged into a cloud storage account, one of 3 she maintained under names connected to an email address Vincent didn't know existed, and opened a folder she had labeled years ago with her mother's maiden name. Inside were scanned copies of documents she had photographed over the years, not systematically, not with a clear plan, but with the instinct of a woman who had never been able to entirely turn off the part of her brain that knew when something was being hidden. Among them was a document she had photographed 14 months ago, a Sunday morning when Vincent was showering and had left his briefcase open on the bedroom chair. She had not read it carefully at the time. She had photographed it quickly, almost automatically, and closed the briefcase and walked to the kitchen and made coffee and never looked at the photograph again. She looked at it now. It was a letter from a law firm she did not recognize, not one of Vincent's regular firms, something smaller, something discreet addressed to Vincent, and concerning what it called the restructuring of marital assets in anticipation of dissolution. She read it twice, then she read it a third time. Dissolution. 14 months ago, Vincent Romano had already been in conversation with a law firm about dissolving their marriage. 14 months ago, while she was planning their anniversary trip to Italy, ironic, she thought with a cold humor she had not known she possessed while she was booking restaurants and researching art galleries, and genuinely believing that the distance between them was temporary and survivable. Her husband had been talking to lawyers about how to end things in a way that would leave her with as little as possible. The letter referenced a strategy. It used careful, bloodless language, but the meaning was clear. Vincent's team planned to establish a narrative of financial dependence and emotional instability. Lauren's financial dependence, Lauren's emotional instability, that would justify a settlement significantly below what 8 years of partnership and contribution would otherwise merit. Emotional instability. She sat with that phrase for a long moment. She thought about every time she had raised a concern and been told she was overthinking, every time she had asked a question and been met with a patience so exaggerated it functioned as contempt, Every time she had trusted her own instincts and then allowed herself to be talked out of them by a man who was, she now understood, carefully and deliberately constructing a record. He had been building a case against her for at least 14 months. She closed the laptop. She stood and walked to the window and looked out at the city, the lights of it, the density of it, the millions of lives stacked on top of one another in the dark, and she let herself feel for exactly 60 seconds everything she had been holding at a distance since the corridor outside the private offices. The grief of it, the waste of it, the particular devastation of discovering that the person who was supposed to be safest had been all along a source of danger. She gave herself 60 seconds. Then she went to the closet and found her small suitcase. She packed with the precision of someone who had thought about this, perhaps not consciously, perhaps not with a specific plan, but with the deep cellular knowing of a person who had been preparing for the possibility of escape longer than she had admitted to herself. She took her passport. She took her father's notebook. She took the laptop. She took a small external hard drive from the back of the desk drawer, one she had filled over the past 2 years with backups of the photographs she had taken, the documents she had copied, the names and numbers she had recorded. She left the jewelry. She left the designer clothes. She left the wedding photograph on the dresser without looking at it. She took nothing that Vincent had given her. She took only what was hers before him, and what she had built quietly, privately, without his knowledge in the years since she had begun to understand what she was actually living inside of. At 4:17 in the morning, Lauren Whitaker zipped the suitcase, pulled on her coat, picked up her bag, and walked out the front door of the apartment she had lived in for 6 years. She did not leave a note. She did not slam the door. She pulled it closed behind her with a soft, deliberate click, the same sound it made every time, and walked to the elevator without looking back. In the lobby, the night doorman, a kind man named Roberto, who had worked the building for 11 years, looked up from his desk with mild surprise. "Mrs. Romano, everything all right?" Lauren smiled at him, not the practiced smile of the gala, but something quieter and more specific. "Everything's fine, Roberto," she said. "I'm going to visit my sister." "Have a safe trip," he said. "Thank you," she said. "I will." She walked out into the pre-dawn dark of the city and did not stop walking. She had no sister. She had a plan. And she had something far more valuable than anything she had left behind in that apartment. She had 8 years of careful, quiet, unassuming observation stored in a mind that Vincent Romano had drastically, fatally underestimated. He had called her a toy. He had said toys get replaced. What Vincent had never understood, what he could not have understood, because understanding it would have required him to see her as a full human being rather than a useful object, was that Lauren Whitaker had never been a toy at all. She had been from the very beginning a witness. She had watched everything. She had remembered everything. And now, for the first time in 8 years, she was free to use it. The city was cold and dark around her, and she walked through it with her suitcase and her evidence and the particular forward-leaning momentum of a woman who has finally completely stopped waiting to be underestimated and started deciding exactly what she intends to do about it. Somewhere behind her, in a bedroom on the 14th floor of a building she would never enter again, Vincent Romano slept the easy sleep of a man who believed he had everything under control. He would wake in a few hours. He would find her gone. And the version of the story he had been telling himself, the version in which Lauren was manageable, predictable, and powerless, would begin very quietly to come apart at every seam. The city was still dark when Lauren's cab pulled away from the building. 4:22 in the morning. She did not look back at the glass facade, did not watch the lobby lights shrink in the rear window. She sat forward, both hands on her bag, and told the driver an address on the west side. Not her destination, just a starting point, a place to begin moving from. She had learned long ago that the first direction you travel is not always the direction you intend to go. What mattered was that you were moving. She had 47 minutes before Vincent's alarm was set to go off. She had used them to plan. The cab stopped at a 24-hour diner on 10th Avenue, and Lauren paid in cash, walked inside, ordered coffee she didn't drink, and sat in the back booth with her laptop open. The diner was almost empty, a man in a construction jacket at the counter, a young woman with headphones at the window. No one paid Lauren any attention. She was just another person in New York who couldn't sleep, and New York had always been accommodating to people like that. She opened the laptop and went directly to the encrypted folder she had built over 2 years of quiet, deliberate preparation. She had told herself it was insurance. She had told herself she hoped she would never need it. Now she opened it with the focused calm of a woman who understood that hope was no longer the relevant emotion. The folder contained 43 files, photographs of documents, scanned pages, screenshots of transactions, a spreadsheet she had built herself painstakingly cross-referencing names and dates and dollar amounts that had never quite aligned with Vincent's public financial statements. She had not known when she started collecting these things exactly what she was building. She had simply known that something was wrong, the way you know a sound in a wall is wrong before you understand what's causing it, a knowledge that lives in the body before it arrives in the mind. Now she understood exactly what she had built. She had built a case. She opened her phone, not the phone Vincent paid for, the one linked to their shared plan, but a prepaid she had purchased 3 weeks ago at a drugstore in the Bronx, and she found the number she needed. She had memorized it months ago, without knowing why. The way you memorize something your gut tells you you'll need before your brain has caught up to the reason. David Carter, former federal financial crimes investigator, 31 years with the Bureau before a disagreement about a case that had been buried for political reasons drove him into private practice. He had worked with Lauren's father in the early 90s on a fraud case that sent 4 men to prison and recovered $11 million. Lauren had not spoken to David Carter in 6 years. She had no particular reason to believe he would answer a call at 4:30 in the morning. She called anyway. He picked up on the second ring. "Carter," he said. Just his name. The voice of a man who expected calls at unusual hours and had stopped being surprised by them. "David," Lauren said. "It's Lauren Whitaker, Marcus Whitaker's daughter." A pause. Not the pause of confusion, the pause of recalibration of a man shifting from whatever state he'd been in to full attention. "Lauren." His voice changed, warmer but careful. "It's 4:30 in the morning." "I know, I'm sorry, I need your help." Another pause, shorter this time. "Where are you?" She told him the diner. He told her he could be there in 40 minutes. She told him to take his time. He said he wouldn't. And she believed him because David Carter was the kind of man who meant what he said in the same uncomplicated way that her father had meant what he said. And she had spent the last 8 years in the company of a man who had never meant a single word, which made the contrast almost physical, something she could feel in her chest, like a change in air pressure. She closed the laptop and sat with her coffee and waited. And while she waited, she thought about the first time Vincent Romano had told her he loved her. They had been at a small restaurant in the West Village 7 weeks after they met, and he had reached across the table and taken her hand and looked at her with an expression she had spent years trying to accurately describe, and had finally, sitting alone in a diner at 4:30 in the morning, found the right word for: proprietary. He had looked at her the way he looked at a building he wanted to acquire. The love had been real. She thought she still believed that much, but it had always been tangled up with ownership, in a way she hadn't had the language to name when she was 29, and newly in love, and willing to believe the feeling was simpler than it was. She pushed the memory away. This was not the moment for grief. Grief had its place, and she would get to it, but its place was not here, and its time was not now. David Carter walked into the diner at 5:14, 17 minutes ahead of his estimate. He was 63, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades learning to read rooms before entering them. He scanned the diner and under 3 seconds found her and crossed the floor without hesitation. He sat down across from her and looked at her face for a long moment without speaking. "You left him," he said, not a question. "Tonight," she said, "you have documentation. 43 files, cross-referenced, going back 2 years. She paused. "And that's only what I was able to gather without him knowing I was looking. I suspect there's considerably more I haven't seen." David studied her carefully. "How long have you known something was wrong?" Lauren thought about it honestly. 4 years, she said. "Maybe 5. I knew something was off. I didn't know the shape of it. And now I know the shape." She opened the laptop and turned it toward him. "Start with the 3rd file, the one labeled with the date 18 months ago." He read in silence for 4 minutes. She watched his face. He was a man who controlled his expressions with precision, but she saw the moment he understood what he was looking at. A slight tightening around the eyes, a stillness that was different from the stillness before. "This is an offshore structure," he said quietly. "Layered, 3 jurisdictions." 4, Lauren said. There's a fourth layer connected to a subsidiary in Cyprus that he set up through a shell registered in Delaware. The Delaware company is listed under his mother's maiden name. David looked up at her. How did you find the Cyprus connection? He left a briefcase open. A beat of silence. Then David Carter almost smiled, not quite, but almost. Your father's daughter, he said. I need to know how bad it is, Lauren said. Not for my own sake. I need to know how bad it is before I decide what to do with what I have. David turned back to the screen. He scrolled slowly, reading with the focused attention of a man who had spent 30 years finding the truth in financial documents that had been specifically designed to obscure it. Outside the city was beginning to lighten at its edges, the particular blue-gray of early morning that belonged to no specific hour, only to the transition between darkness and something else. After 12 minutes, David looked up. Lauren, he said, and the way he said her name told her everything before he said anything else. This isn't just financial manipulation. This isn't just hidden assets or an aggressive divorce strategy. He paused. What you have here, even just the piece of it you've managed to collect, this connects to things the Bureau has been looking at for the better part of 3 years. The diner seemed to go very quiet. What kind of things? She asked. The kind that have names attached to them, David said carefully. Big names, political names, the kind of investigation that keeps getting delayed because the right people are making the right calls to the right offices. He leaned forward. Vincent Romano is not just your husband hiding money. Vincent Romano is a node in a network that has been operating in this city for 20 years. And you, he gestured at the laptop, you have been sitting inside it collecting evidence for 2 years, without knowing the full scope of what you were collecting. Lauren felt something move through her that was not quite fear and not quite excitement, but lived in the space between them, in the territory of understanding that changes everything. He planned to divorce me, she said. He had lawyers working on it 14 months ago, a strategy to make me look unstable. Of course he did, David said. There was no surprise in his voice, only a weary recognition. Because you were the one person inside his life who had the skills to see clearly. Even if you weren't fully using them, the possibility existed. And Vincent Romano does not tolerate the possibility of exposure. He thought I was too in love to look, Lauren said. Were you? She considered the question honestly. For a while, she said. And then I was too, she searched for the word. I was too invested in the version of things I'd chosen to believe. It takes time to let go of a version you worked that hard to maintain. David nodded. He understood this. His 30 years had shown him too many people who had stayed too long in proximity to dangerous men because the alternative required them to dismantle a life they had built a self. They had constructed an entire architecture of meaning they were not ready to abandon. So what do you want to do? He asked. I want to do it right, Lauren said. I want to do it in a way that cannot be undone, cannot be bought off, cannot be quietly buried by a phone call from the right person to the right office. She looked at him steadily. I want to do it in a way that means something. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I know someone at the Southern District, someone who has been waiting for exactly the kind of documentation you're describing. Someone who has been stonewalled for 2 years because every time they get close, the evidence disappears before it can be properly logged. He paused. If I make this introduction, Lauren, there is no turning back. Once this moves, it moves fast and it moves publicly. Vincent will know immediately that it came from inside. He already planned to destroy me, Lauren said. The only question was whether I was going to let him. Another silence. Then David Carter reached across the table and closed the laptop and said, All right, here's what we need to do. They talked for 2 hours. The diner filled around them and emptied and filled again with the ordinary rhythm of morning construction workers, nurses coming off night shifts, a group of college students who were clearly still awake from the night before rather than newly awake for the day. Lauren and David occupied their booth like a fixed point, talking quietly and steadily through everything she had, everything she knew, everything she had seen, without fully registering that she was seeing it. At 7:15, Lauren's prepaid phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, a text from a number she didn't recognize, which, given that the phone was prepaid and unregistered, was remarkable in itself because almost no one had this number. The text said, He's awake. He found your note. There is no note. I know that's the point. Call me. Lauren stared at the message. What is it? David asked. She turned the phone toward him. He read it. His expression shifted. Who has this number? Almost no one, Lauren said. One person actually who I trust absolutely, but this isn't her number, she thought for a moment, running through the possibilities with the methodical speed that had always been her particular gift. Unless she's using a different phone. She called the number. It rang once. A woman's voice answered, careful, controlled, but underneath the control, something that sounded distinctly like fear. Lauren, the voice said, don't say my name. Lauren understood immediately. She kept her voice even. I'm listening. He woke up 20 minutes ago. He looked in the bedroom, in the kitchen, in the study. He found the desk drawer open. A pause. He stood in the study doorway for 30 seconds without moving. I've never seen him do that. He went very still. Another pause. Then he made a phone call. I only heard pieces, but I heard him say your name, and I heard him say the word documents, and his voice was... The woman stopped. His voice was different, Lauren. I've worked for this man for 3 years, and I've heard him angry, and I've heard him calculating, and I've heard him dangerous. This morning his voice was something I don't have a word for. Natalie, Lauren said quietly. She said the name in spite of the instruction not to, because the name mattered, because Natalie Brooks being the one on the other end of this call mattered enormously, and Lauren needed to confirm it. A breath. Yes. Why are you calling me? The question sat in the silence for a long moment. Because last night I heard what he said about you, Natalie said finally. In the office. I know you were in the hallway. I saw you walk away. Her voice was careful and complicated, carrying the particular weight of someone who has done a thing they cannot fully justify, but cannot stop themselves from doing. I've made choices I'm not proud of, Lauren, but I don't want to be part of what he's planning now. What is he planning? He made 2 calls after the first one. The second call was to Gerald Hess. A pause. The third call was to someone I've only heard him call once before, a man whose name he never says out loud. He just says the number. He called the number Lauren. David Carter, watching Lauren's face, sat forward in his chair. Natalie, Lauren said, still very calm the way the surface of deep water is calm. I need you to listen to me carefully. I need you to leave the apartment. Right now. Take nothing except your personal phone and your wallet. Go somewhere public and stay there. Do not go back. You're serious, Natalie said. Not a question. The fear in her voice had sharpened into something more specific, more immediate. I am entirely serious, Lauren said. He called the number Natalie. You said it yourself. You understand what that means better than I do, because you've been closer to his operation than I knew. A long silence. I'll leave in 10 minutes, Natalie said. There's something I need to tell you first. Something I found 3 weeks ago that I didn't know what to do with it. I've been carrying it, and I didn't know what to do. Tell me. He has a file, Natalie said. A physical file, not digital. He keeps it in the false bottom of the briefcase, the old leather one, not the carbon fiber one he uses for meetings. I found it by accident when the lining tore. I photographed it before I understood what it was. Her voice dropped lower. Lauren, it's a file about you, going back to before you were married, before you met him. He knew about your work, your investigative work. He knew exactly what you were capable of when he married you. The diner noise receded to somewhere very far away. He knew, Lauren said. He chose you because of it, Natalie said. There are notes in the file, in his handwriting. He married you because he needed someone with your skills close to him, someone who could spot the things he needed spotted, and who he believed he could control through... She stopped. Through love, Lauren said. Yes. The word landed like a stone in still water, and the ripples it sent out moved through everything, through every memory of their early days together. Every moment she had believed she was choosing to be with him, and had not understood she was being chosen, had been selected the way a tool is selected, assessed for its utility, and acquired accordingly. 8 years. She had given 8 years to a man who had looked at her capacity for love and seen a mechanism of control. Natalie, Lauren said. Her voice was very steady, steadier than she expected. Leave the apartment. Call me when you're somewhere safe. Bring whatever you photographed. Okay, Natalie said. Okay. And then quietly, in a voice that carried something genuine, I'm sorry, Lauren. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, Lauren said. It doesn't, but it helps. She paused. Go. The call ended. Lauren set the phone on the table and looked at David Carter. David looked back at her. He chose her deliberately, David said. He had heard enough of the conversation to understand the shape of it. He knew what she was when he married her. "He married me because I was a financial investigator," Lauren said. "He thought he could use my skills and neutralize the threat simultaneously. Keep me close, keep me loyal, keep me looking at him through the eyes of a woman in love, so I would never look at him through the eyes of what I actually was." "It almost worked," David said. "It did work," Lauren said. "For 8 years it worked perfectly." She was quiet for a moment. He underestimated one thing. "What? Love doesn't actually make you blind," Lauren said. "It makes you patient, and patient people notice everything. They just wait longer to act on what they've seen." David Carter looked at her for a long moment, with an expression she recognized from her father, the expression of a man who had spent his life working with people and had just been reminded unexpectedly of what people were capable of. "We need to move faster than I thought," he said. "I know. The Southern District contact, I need to make that call today. This morning if possible, not because of what you have, which is already significant, but because if Vincent Romano has called whoever he calls when things go wrong, we have a much shorter window than I'd estimated." "Then call," Lauren said. David reached for his own phone. And Lauren sat in this diner where no one knew her name in the early morning of the first day of the rest of her life, and thought about a man who had looked at her capacity for love and mistaken it for weakness, who had looked at her patience and mistaken it for passivity, who had built an 8-year strategy around the assumption that she would never fully see him, never fully understand, never reach the point where what she knew outweighed what she felt. He had been so certain. "I was always so certain." She reached into her bag and pulled out the small external hard drive and held it in both hands for a moment. This small, solid, unremarkable object that contained 2 years of quiet documentation, 43 files, cross-referenced dates and names and dollar amounts and photographs of documents that a powerful man had left slightly too accessible because he had never genuinely believed she was looking. She set it on the table beside the laptop. Outside the city was fully awake, now moving with the particular purposeful energy of a Tuesday morning, millions of people in motion, the machinery of the world, turning over in its ordinary, inexorable way, indifferent to the fact that in a diner on 10th Avenue, something was happening that would eventually reach a great many of those people in ways none of them could yet anticipate. David ended his call. He sat back down. His face was different now, sharper, more alert, carrying the particular quality of someone who has just confirmed that the situation is exactly as serious as they suspected. "My contact wants to meet," he said. "Today, 2 o'clock. "Where?" he told her. "A federal building. A conference room that did not appear on the standard directory. A woman named Reyes, who had, David said, been building a case for 31 months and had twice seen her work quietly dismantled by interventions she couldn't prove and couldn't stop and couldn't discuss with anyone outside a very small circle of people she absolutely trusted." "She's going to want everything," David said. "She can have everything," Lauren said. "This goes beyond your divorce, Lauren, beyond your marriage, beyond Vincent personally. You understand that?" "I understood that at 3 in the morning, Lauren said. "When I read what I read in that file." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't walk out of that apartment with a suitcase to save myself, David. I mean, yes, I walked out to save myself. But I also walked out because I spent 8 years inside something that has been hurting people, and I have the ability to do something about it, and doing nothing was no longer something I was capable of choosing." David was quiet. Then he said simply, "Your father would be proud of you." Lauren felt the words move through her in a complicated way, with warmth and with grief, and with the particular tenderness of someone hearing a true thing at exactly the right moment. "I know," she said. "I know he would." Her phone buzzed again. A text from Natalie's temporary number. 4 words. "I'm out. I'm safe." And then 30 seconds later, a photograph. A document. Handwritten notes in a handwriting Lauren knew as well as her own. She had read it on birthday cards and grocery lists and the margins of contracts for 8 years. She enlarged the photograph on her screen and read Vincent Romano's handwriting, a private note from years before their marriage, a note in which he described in the clinical language of strategy exactly why Lauren Whitaker was the right woman to marry and what she would provide him, and how he intended to ensure she remained useful without becoming dangerous. He had written about her the way a general writes about territory, the way a collector writes about an acquisition. The way a man writes about something he intends to own, and at the bottom of the note in a line that he must have written. At some moment of private satisfaction was a sentence that Lauren read 3 times and then looked away from and then came back to. She will look and never see. She loves too completely to look clearly. That is her limitation and my advantage. Lauren set the phone down. She breathed. She thought about this woman who had stood in a corridor the night before and heard herself called a toy and understood every word and felt the bruise forming on her wrist and kept her face absolutely still. That woman had looked very clearly. That woman had always looked clearly. And the man who had spent 8 years counting on her love to prevent it had made the one mistake no amount of strategy could survive. He had been wrong about who she was. He had been wrong from the very beginning. And now, with a federal contact waiting at 2 o'clock and 43 files on a hard drive and a photograph of his own handwriting in her hand, Lauren Whitaker was about to show him exactly how wrong he had been. David Carter made 3 calls before 9 in the morning, and by the 3rd one his voice had dropped to the particular register Lauren had come to associate with things that were serious beyond the ordinary definition of serious. She sat across from him and watched his face and learned more from his expressions than she could have from the words which she could only hear one side of anyway. He nodded twice. He said confirmed once. He said, "We'll need chain of custody documentation from the point of collection," in a tone that made Lauren understand the meeting at 2 o'clock was no longer a preliminary conversation, but something considerably more formal than that. When he ended the 3rd call, he set his phone on the table and was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone organizing a large number of moving pieces into an order that made sense. "Reyes has been waiting for a break like this for 2.5 years, he said. "She's bringing her deputy and a forensic accountant. The forensic accountant has been working the Romano financial structure from the outside for 18 months without being able to get past the 2nd layer." He looked at Lauren. "You have documentation from inside the 2nd layer, from inside the 3rd layer. And if what Natalie photographed is what I think it is, you may have something that reaches all the way to the 4th. "The Cyprus account," Lauren said. "And what connects to it?" David said. He paused. "Lauren, I have to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me just as directly." "Go ahead." "In 8 years of marriage, did you ever participate knowingly or unknowingly in any transaction, any communication, any action connected to the financial structure we're looking at?" The question was fair. She had known it was coming. "Unknowingly, almost certainly," she said. "He used my name on 2 holding company registrations. I signed documents he described as routine real estate filings. I made introductions to investors on 3 occasions that I now believe were not the introductions I thought they were." She kept her voice level. "Knowingly, not once, not a single time." David nodded. "Then you're a witness, not a subject. That's what matters." "Is that going to be Reyes's position?" "It will be after she reads what you brought her," David said. He stood up. "We have 4 hours before the meeting. We need to organize what you have into a presentation that a federal prosecutor can follow. Not because Reyes won't understand it. She'll understand it faster than either of us, but because the documentation needs to be structured for legal intake. Chain of custody, timestamps, your account of how and when you obtained each piece." They moved to a copy shop 2 blocks from the diner, where David had an account and spent the next 3 hours doing something that felt simultaneously mundane and momentous, printing documents, organizing folders, building a chronological record of 43 files, and what each one contained and how Lauren had come to possess it. She narrated, and David organized, and the forensic accountant David had called in remotely, a woman named Patricia Shan, who worked from an office in Washington, walked them through which documents were most significant and in what order and why. Patricia's voice on the speakerphone was brisk and precise. "The Delaware Shell Company registration," she said at one point. "That document alone establishes the connection I've been trying to prove from the outside for a year. Where did she get this?" "Briefcase," Lauren said. "Open on the kitchen table, 18 months ago." A pause. "And you photographed it." "I photographed it." Another pause longer. "Mrs. Romano," Patricia said, "in 30 years of forensic accounting, the single most valuable evidence I've ever encountered has come not from surveillance or subpoenas or wiretaps, but from someone who was simply paying attention in a room where someone else believed they were safe." Her voice carried something that was almost warmth. "You were paying attention." "I was always paying attention," Lauren said. "I just didn't always know what I was attending to." At 11:47, Lauren's phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. She was at a coffee shop in Midtown. She had the photographs from Vincent's private file. She had something else too, something she hadn't mentioned on the phone because she hadn't been sure how to say it and wasn't sure it mattered, and then had spent the past 3 hours deciding that it did. Lauren texted back, "Tell me." The response came in pieces as if Natalie was typing and deleting and retyping. Lauren watched the ellipsis appear and disappear 3 times before the message finally arrived. "There's a second file, behind the first one. I almost missed it because it was thinner and the color was similar. I don't know what's in it because I only had 40 seconds and I photographed everything I could see, but I wasn't sure the photos were clear enough. The name on the second file tab is Hess." Lauren read the name twice. Gerald Hess, Vincent's lawyer. The man Vincent had called first thing this morning, according to Natalie's account of the calls from the apartment. She showed the text to David. David read it, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Hess has been Vincent's primary outside counsel for 12 years, he said. "If there's a file on Hess inside Vincent's private papers, that means one of 2 things. Either Vincent has been running something that Hess is complicit in, or he stopped. Or Vincent has been running something on Hess," Lauren finished. "Leverage. Something he could use to ensure Hess stayed compliant." "Either scenario," David said, "is significant." "Send me the photographs," Lauren texted Natalie. "All of them, even the ones you think are too blurry." 14 photographs arrived in the next 2 minutes. Lauren forwarded them to Patricia Shan, who called back in 4 minutes with a voice that had lost its briskness and gained something more urgent. "The second file is a record of payments," Patricia said. "I can make out about 60% of the text in these photographs. What I can read is a payment log going back 9 years. The payee column has been redacted. Someone went through the physical pages with a marker, but the marker wasn't dark enough in all places. I can see fragments, enough to identify at least 3 of the entries." She paused. "One of them is a name that is going to change the shape of this case considerably." "Tell me," David said. Patricia told him. Lauren watched David Carter's face go through 3 separate and distinct changes of expression in under 4 seconds. She had not seen David Carter look genuinely startled in the 4 hours she had known him as an adult, and she understood from the fact that he looked startled now that the name Patricia had just spoken was not a name that anyone had expected to appear in a file inside Vincent Romano's private briefcase. "Say it again," David said. Patricia said it again. David looked at Lauren. "Do you know this name?" he asked, and he said the name, and Lauren felt a sensation. She had no precedent for a kind of vertiginous recognition, the feeling of a piece dropping into a puzzle you did not know was missing. She knew the name. She knew it because she had met him. Twice, both times at events Vincent had brought her to in the past 3 years. A public figure. A man whose face appeared in newspapers in connection with civic responsibilities and charitable giving and the ordinary language of institutional respectability. A man who had shaken Lauren's hand and complimented Vincent's taste and seemed in both encounters like someone entirely accustomed to being in rooms where things happened. "I've met him," Lauren said. "When?" she told him. "Both occasions." The details she remembered what he said, who else was present, the particular way he and Vincent had interacted. The body language she had noted without noting that she was noting it. David listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Lauren, I need you to understand something. When we walk into that meeting at 2 o'clock, the case you're presenting is no longer just the Romano case. What you have, what Natalie photographed, combined with what you've been collecting, this is the kind of documentation that gets people moved to safe houses." The words landed quietly. "Are you telling me I'm in danger?" Lauren asked. "I'm telling you that Vincent Romano calling the number this morning was not a small thing," David said. "And the name in that file connects this to people who have considerably more resources than Vincent and considerably less reluctance to use them." He held her gaze. "I'm also telling you that what you have is so significant that the moment it's in federal hands, you become more protected than endangered. But we need to get it there first." "Then let's go," Lauren said. They arrived at the federal building at 1:43. Reyes was already there, a woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular quality of someone who has been doing difficult work for a long time and has not been broken by it. She stood up when Lauren walked in and extended her hand and said, "Mrs. Romano, thank you for coming." "Whitaker," Lauren said. "Lauren Whitaker." Reyes nodded once with an expression that registered this correction as meaningful. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, "please sit down." The forensic accountant Reyes had brought was a man named Torres, who had the intense inward focus of someone who communicated primarily with numbers and found them more reliable than people. He opened Lauren's folder the moment it was placed in front of him and did not look up again for 11 minutes. When he did look up, he said directly to Reyes without preamble, "The Cypress structure. We've been looking for the domestic connection for 18 months. This is it. This is exactly it." He held up the document Lauren had photographed from Vincent's kitchen table. "This one document properly authenticated fills the gap in the chain we haven't been able to close." Reyes looked at Lauren. "How did you obtain this?" Lauren explained. "Every document, every photograph, every date and circumstance." She spoke for 40 minutes with the organized precision of someone who had spent a career presenting evidence, and Reyes and Torres listened without interrupting, except to ask clarifying questions that were always specific and always relevant. The deputy, a young man named Park, who had not spoken since introductions, took notes in a shorthand so rapid his pen barely seemed to touch the paper. At the 40-minute mark, Lauren placed Natalie's photographs on the table. "These were obtained this morning," Lauren said, "by someone who was in a position of proximity to my husband and who contacted me independently after witnessing events that caused her to believe she was in danger." She described the photographs, the payment log, the redacted names, the fragments visible through inadequate marker coverage. "We've identified fragments of 3 payees. The third one is," she said the name. Reyes did not change expression. This was remarkable in itself, the kind of controlled non-reaction that takes years to develop. Torres put down his pen. Park's shorthand stopped mid-stroke. The silence in the conference room had a texture to it, the texture of a room in which everyone present has simultaneously understood that the thing they are dealing with has just become categorically larger than it was 60 seconds ago. "Where is the physical file?" Reyes asked. Her voice was entirely steady. "Still in my husband's apartment as far as I know," Lauren said. "The photographs were taken this morning before 7 a.m. My husband was awake by 6:40, according to my source. I cannot confirm the current status of the physical document." Reyes looked at Park. Park was already reaching for his phone. He stepped out of the conference room without being told to. "Your source," Reyes said. "Can we speak with her?" "She's willing," Lauren said. "She was an employee of my husband. She has her own exposure to consider, but she contacted me voluntarily this morning, and I believe her cooperation is genuine. We'll need to assess her separately," Reyes said. "But yes, we'll want her." She paused. "Ms. Whitaker, I want to be straightforward with you. What you've brought today is significant, possibly more significant than you fully understand. I've been building toward this case for a long time, and I've been blocked every time I've gotten close in ways that suggest the obstruction is coming from above the level I can reach." She paused. "What you have reaches the level I can't reach. That matters." "Vincent planned to discredit me," Lauren said. "He had a strategy in place for at least 14 months to make me look unstable, financially dependent, and emotionally unreliable." "We know about the strategy," Reyes said quietly. Lauren stopped. "You know, we've been monitoring Gerald Hess's firm since last year," Reyes said. "Not Vincent directly. Hess was a thread we could pull without alerting the primary target. We saw the file preparation. We saw the communications about a planned divorce proceeding." She looked at Lauren with an expression that carried something rare in federal conference rooms, genuine human weight. "We were concerned. There was discussion about whether to approach you. The decision was made not to because the risk of alerting Vincent was considered too high." Lauren absorbed this. The government had known about the plan to destroy her. They had chosen the case over her protection. She was not in this moment angry about it. She understood the calculus, even if understanding it did not make it comfortable. She had spent enough years working investigations to know that the machinery of accountability moved on its own logic, and that logic was not always kind to individual people, even when it was correct in aggregate. "I understand," she said. Reyes looked at her with something that went beyond professional regard. "I want you to know," she said, "that the fact that you got out on your own terms, that you left on your own timeline, with your own evidence under your own power, is not a small thing. We would have come to you eventually. It might have been too late for some of what you've collected, and it would have been on our terms, not yours." She paused. "Coming here the way you've come, you have standing that you wouldn't have had otherwise. You're not someone we approached. You're someone who brought us something." Good, Lauren said. That matters to me. It should, Reyes said. Park returned to the conference room. He leaned down and said something quietly to Reyes that the others couldn't hear. Reyes listened, nodded once, and Park straightened and returned to his seat. Reyes looked at the table for a moment, then she looked at Lauren. "We need to move on the apartment," she said. "Today, within the hour." "Vincent will be there," Lauren said. "Yes," Reyes said. "He will." The room was very quiet. Lauren thought about the man she had married, the man who had pulled her close at a charity gala and left bruises on her wrist and spoken about her in Italian in a private hallway, laughing, certain of his safety, certain of his dominance, certain that the woman he had chosen for her usefulness had been so thoroughly managed by love that she would never be anything but an asset he controlled. She thought about the note in his handwriting. "She will look and never see. She loves too completely to look clearly. That is her limitation, and my advantage." She thought about 8 years of careful, unintentional, persistent, unstoppable looking. "Do what you need to do," Lauren said. Reyes nodded. She turned to Torres and Park, and they moved into the particular synchronized efficiency of people who have rehearsed a sequence many times and are now finally at last executing it for real. David Carter put his hand briefly on Lauren's arm. "You did everything right," he said. "I did everything late," Lauren said. "Late and right is better than never," David said, "and considerably better than on time and wrong." She almost smiled at that. Almost. Her phone buzzed. Natalie again. Lauren looked at the screen and felt something she had not anticipated, a cold, specific clarity, the kind that arrives when a situation that has been moving fast suddenly accelerates past the point of any possible reversal. The text said, "He's not at the apartment. He left 20 minutes ago." He took the leather briefcase. Lauren stood up. "Reyes," she said. Reyes looked up from the documents she was organizing. Lauren showed her the phone. "Reyes, read the text." Her expression did not change, but she stood up with the immediacy of someone for whom stillness has just become impossible. "Where would he go?" she asked Lauren. Not gently, urgently, the way you ask a question when the answer has to arrive in under 3 seconds, Lauren thought. She thought about Vincent, the way she had always thought about him, not emotionally, not with the blur of feeling that had clouded her vision for so long, but clearly precisely with the complete and unobstructed sight of someone who spent 8 years in the same room as a man and learned down to the cellular level how he moved when he was afraid. Because that was the thing about Vincent Romano. For all his power, for all his strategy, for all his carefully built architecture of control, he had a pattern. Everyone had a pattern. And Lauren had been observing his for 8 years, with the attention of someone whose professional training had never fully stopped operating, even when she had tried to make it stop. Even when she had told herself she was just a wife, now just a partner, just a woman in love, who had set aside the part of herself that cataloged and analyzed and retained. That part had never set itself aside. It had only been waiting. "He has a place," Lauren said. "Not an apartment. Not anywhere connected to his public life. A property he never mentioned to me registered under the Delaware Shell Company. I found the address in one of the files." She looked at Reyes. "He goes there when he needs to disappear. He's told me once or twice in the vague way he mentions things he doesn't expect me to remember that he has a place he goes to think. I thought he meant his office." She paused. "He didn't mean his office." "You have the address," Reyes said. "I have the address." She found it in the 43rd file, the last one she had added to the folder, photographed just 3 months ago from a document she had discovered in a jacket pocket while sorting clothes for the dry cleaner. She had not known what to make of it at the time. She had photographed it anyway, filed it, and moved on. She had learned by then not to question why she was collecting things. She had learned to trust the collecting. She pulled up the photograph on her laptop and read Reyes the address. Reyes repeated it to Park without even fully turning her head. Park was already on the phone. The conference room became something different from what it had been 5 minutes earlier. It became a room where things were being set in motion that could not be stopped, where the careful, patient, painstaking work of accumulation was converting into action with the sudden, irreversible momentum of a structure that has been under pressure for a very long time and has finally, at the exact right moment, given way. Lauren sat in the middle of it and felt completely, almost frighteningly calm. She thought about the corridor at the gala, the The door, the Italian, the bruise forming on her wrist while she stood perfectly still and understood every word and showed nothing. She thought about the 4 seconds she had counted after she heard what she heard before she turned and walked back to the party. She thought about how much she had understood in those 4 seconds, how much she had always understood, how long she had been the most dangerous person in Vincent Romano's life without either of them knowing it. He had called her a toy. He had said toys get replaced. What he had never accounted for, what his arrogance had made structurally impossible for him to account for, was that toys do not think, they do not plan, they do not spend 8 years quietly building the case that will take everything from you. They do not walk out at 4 in the morning and call a federal investigator and sit in a conference room and hand the government exactly what it has been missing for 2.5 years, and then calmly, precisely without drama, provide the address where you can be found. Lauren Whitaker had never been a toy. She had been from the very beginning the one thing Vincent Romano could not survive, his equal. And now she was something more dangerous than that. She was the woman who had already won sitting quietly in a federal conference room while the world around her rearranged itself into the shape she had, without fully knowing it, been building toward for 8 years. Reyes's phone rang. She answered. She listened for 30 seconds without speaking. Then she said, "Move," and ended the call. She looked at Lauren. "He's at the property," Reyes said. And Lauren closed her laptop and folded her hands on the table and waited for the next part of what she had started to arrive. Reyes left the conference room at 2:51, and the particular quality of her departure, measured purposeful, the movement of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a specific door to open and is now walking through it without rushing, told Lauren everything she needed to know about what was happening on the other side of the city. David Carter stayed. He sat across from Lauren in the conference room that had grown quieter without Reyes and Torres and the controlled momentum they carried, and he poured 2 cups of coffee from a carafe on the side table and set one in front of Lauren without asking if she wanted it. She picked it up. She held it with both hands. She did not drink. "How long?" she asked. "Depends on what he does when they arrive," David said. "If he's alone and he's smart, maybe an hour before we hear something. If he's made additional calls, if there are other people at the property..." He paused. "Longer." "He'll be smart," Lauren said. "He's always smart in the moment. That's actually part of what made him dangerous. He never panics visibly." She set the cup down. "He'll be calm. He'll ask for a lawyer. He'll say nothing until Gerald Hess arrives." She paused. "Except Gerald Hess has his own problems right now." "Hess doesn't know that yet," David said. "No," Lauren said. "He doesn't." She thought about Gerald Hess. She had known him for 8 years the way you know people who exist at the edges of your life, present at events familiar without being intimate. He was a careful man, meticulous, the kind of lawyer who succeeded not through brilliance, but through the absolute elimination of error. She had always found him slightly cold, and had assumed, without examining the assumption, that coldness was simply the professional temperature of his particular work. Now she understood this coldness differently. It was not professionalism. It was the cultivated affect of a man who had been for a very long time doing things he could not allow himself to feel too clearly about. Her phone buzzed. "Natalie, are you okay?" Lauren looked at the text for a moment. It was such a simple question, the kind of question that in an ordinary context would have an ordinary answer. She typed back, "Yes. Are you?" The response came immediately, "Scared. But okay. They called me Reyes's office. Someone named Park. I'm going in tomorrow morning." Lauren typed, "Tell them everything. Don't protect him. There's nothing left to protect." A pause. "Then I know. I keep thinking about the version of him I thought I knew." Lauren understood this completely. She had spent 8 years with the version of Vincent Romano she thought she knew. She had built a life inside that version, made decisions inside it, loved inside it. Discovering that the version was constructed deliberately, skillfully, for specific strategic purposes, did not erase the experience of having lived inside it. The love had been real, even if the man who received it had been in fundamental ways performing. That was perhaps the most disorienting thing. Not the betrayal itself, but the way the betrayal could not retroactively empty the years. They had happened. She had been in them. And the grief of the real things that existed inside a false architecture was something she would be sorting through for a long time. But not today. Today required a different kind of attention. She typed to Natalie, "The version you knew was designed to be believed. That's not your failure. That's his method." 3 minutes passed. Then, "Thank you." Lauren set the phone down and looked at David. "Reyes knew about the divorce strategy," she said. "She said they'd been monitoring Hess's firm. They saw it being prepared." She paused. "She said there was a discussion about whether to approach me." David was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, "That decision was made above Reyes's level." "I know." Lauren looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to justify it. I'm saying it out loud because I think it needs to be said out loud before I decide what I feel about it." "What do you feel about it?" She considered the question honestly. "I feel like a person who was in a burning building while people outside debated whether the best strategy was to call the fire department or let the fire burn itself out so they could examine the cause more effectively." She paused. "I understand the logic. I've used similar logic in my own work. I still feel what I feel about it." "That's fair," David said. "And I also feel," she continued, "that I got myself out of the building, which means I did not wait for someone else's strategy to include me, which means I'm sitting here with standing I wouldn't have had otherwise." She picked up the coffee again. "So ultimately it worked out, but I don't want to pretend it was comfortable to learn." David nodded. He did not offer reassurance, which was one of the things Lauren appreciated about him. He was a man who had learned to be present with difficult truths without trying to smooth them into something easier. Her father had been the same way. At 344, Park called from a number Lauren didn't recognize. She answered immediately. "Ms. Whitaker," Park said. His voice was professional, contained, but carrying something underneath it that Lauren had learned to identify the particular energy of someone reporting from the immediate aftermath of something significant. "Mr. Romano is in federal custody. The property has been secured. We've recovered the leather briefcase." Lauren closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "The physical files?" she asked. "Both of them," Park said. "The Romano file and the Hess file, intact." She opened her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Agent Reyes would like to speak with you this afternoon, if possible. She's returning to the building now. She estimates 40 minutes. "I'll be here," Lauren said. She ended the call and looked at David. "He's in custody," she said. David exhaled, not dramatically, but with the specific quality of a long-held breath finally released. "The files, both intact." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Lauren." "I know," she said. Because she did know. She knew what it meant, and she knew what it cost, and she knew that these two things existed simultaneously without canceling each other out. Vincent Romano in federal custody was justice, and it was the loss of the man she had believed she was married to, which was not the same as the man she had actually been married to, but which had been real to her, which had mattered to her, which she had given 8 years of her life to. Both things were true at the same time. She was not going to pretend otherwise. She sat with both things for a while there in the quiet of the conference room with David Carter across from her, and the city moving outside, and the day continuing its ordinary progress, entirely indifferent to the fact that something in Lauren Whitaker's life had just shifted from one state to another permanently and without possibility of reversal. Reyes arrived at 4:22. She had the briefcase with her in an evidence bag now properly tagged and logged, and she set it on the table with a care that acknowledged its significance. She sat down and took a moment before she spoke, which Lauren had come to understand was simply how Reyes worked. She never spoke before she was ready to be precise. "He asked for Hess immediately," Reyes said. "Of course he did," Lauren said. "We informed him that Hess was being contacted by our office in a separate matter." Reyes paused. "That was the first moment I saw him lose composure, just briefly, just for about 3 seconds. And then it was gone, and he was back to being Vincent Romano." She looked at Lauren. "He asked who had provided us with the property address." "What did you tell him?" "We told him nothing," Reyes said. "But he knew. He went very still again, that stillness you described. And then he said, and I'm telling you this because I think you should know, he said, she was always smarter than I let myself believe." The conference room was very quiet. Lauren felt the sentence land in the complex, layered way that only a sentence about yourself spoken by someone who fundamentally failed to understand you can land. It was an acknowledgement and a continued misunderstanding simultaneously. He still framed it as something he had chosen, let himself believe, as if his underestimation of her had been a decision rather than a blindness built into the architecture of how he saw people, how he saw women, how he saw anyone he had ever categorized as a tool. He still thinks it was a choice he made, Lauren said. Reyes looked at her. Yes, he does. It wasn't a choice, Lauren said. It was a limitation. He couldn't have seen me clearly because seeing me clearly would have required him to see me as a full person, and he was constitutionally incapable of that with anyone he believed he owned. She paused. That's not something I'm saying out of anger. That's an accurate psychological description of how he operates. I know, Reyes said. We've had profiles on him for 2 years. Our behavioral analyst used very similar language. She opened a folder. Lauren, I need to walk you through what happens next because it moves quickly from here, and I want you to be prepared rather than surprised. What happened next, Reyes explained, was this. The physical files from the briefcase combined with Lauren's documentation, combined with the testimony Natalie would provide tomorrow, and the forensic accounting work Patricia Shan had been building from the outside for 18 months gave them sufficient foundation to move on the broader network. Not just Vincent, the connections above him, the name in the payment log, the political and institutional infrastructure that had kept his operation insulated and funded and protected for 20 years. This case is going to be public, Reyes said. There's no version of this that isn't public. You need to be prepared for that. I know, Lauren said. Your name will be in it, not as a subject, as a witness, and as the person who brought forward the primary evidence. The strategy Vincent had prepared to characterize you as unstable will be part of the record. It will be documented as an element of the conspiracy. She paused. In other words, the attack he prepared against you will end up being used against him. Lauren absorbed this. There was something almost architectural about it, the mechanism of her own intended destruction repurposed as a brick in the structure that would bring him down. She thought about Vincent's note. She will look and never see. She thought about the 14 months of lawyer meetings and strategy sessions designed to preemptively discredit her. All of it, every calculated, careful, coldly strategic move he had made against her, had become in the end additional evidence of the conspiracy she was exposing. He built his own case against himself, Lauren said. He did, Reyes said. Every step he took to protect himself from you became documentation of what he was protecting. There was a knock at the conference room door. Park opened it and handed Reyes a single sheet of paper. Reyes read it. A muscle in her jaw moved just once, the only outward sign of whatever she was processing. Gerald Hess has requested a meeting with our office, Reyes said. She set the paper on the table. His attorney contacted us 11 minutes ago. He's offering cooperation in exchange for consideration. David Carter made a sound that was not quite a laugh. 11 minutes, he said. That's how long it took Hess to hear that Vincent was in custody and decide which direction loyalty ran. Hess always knew this day was possible, Reyes said. He's been preparing for it, which means he has things to offer, things beyond what we already have. She looked at Lauren. This is what happens when the first piece moves. Everything connected to it recalculates. Lauren thought about the image of dominoes, but it wasn't quite right. Dominoes fell because of physics, because of simple force and direction. What was happening now was more like a web under tension. The moment one strand released, the entire structure reorganized according to its own internal logic, finding new configurations, revealing connections that had been hidden by the tension itself. At 5:15, Reyes stepped out to take a call and returned 3 minutes later with an expression that had been reconfigured in a way Lauren had not seen before. Not quite surprised, because Reyes was not a woman who was easily surprised, but something adjacent to it, something that lived in the territory of significant beyond expectation. The name from the payment log, Reyes said. She sat down. She placed both hands flat on the table, which Lauren had learned was her physical signal for something requiring full attention. He's retained counsel in the last hour. His counsel has contacted the Southern District. He is not offering cooperation. She paused. He's claiming he was a victim of Vincent Romano's scheme, that payments to him were made without his knowledge through accounts he didn't control. The room was silent for a moment. Then David said, "That's not a defense. That's a statement designed to establish a narrative before the facts are public." "Yes," Reyes said, "which means he has people advisors, communications people who have been activated, which means this is going to move into public space faster than I would choose." She looked at Lauren directly. "I want to be honest with you. In the next 24 to 48 hours, this case is likely to become a significant news story. Your name will be in it. The story of how the evidence was obtained will be in it." "Okay," Lauren said. Reyes waited as if expecting more. "I mean it," Lauren said. "Okay, I've thought about this. I've been thinking about it since the diner this morning." She was quiet for a moment, finding the precise words for something she had been turning over since 4 in the morning in a cab heading west on 10th Avenue. "I spent 8 years being made small, carefully, gradually, systematically small. Everything I was before I met him, my career, my skills, my professional reputation, was reduced to the background story of Vincent Romano's wife. That was the plan. Keep the asset useful and keep the asset invisible." She paused. "I don't want to be invisible anymore. If my name is going to be in the story, I want my name in the story as the person who saw what no one else was positioned to see and did something about it, not as a victim, as a witness who acted." Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Then that's exactly how we'll frame your role in the record." At 6:07, Lauren's prepaid phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She looked at it and then at David, and something in her gut, the same gut that had photographed documents from open briefcases, and purchased an untraceable laptop for cash, and memorized David Carter's phone number without consciously deciding to told her to answer it. She answered. The voice was male, older, controlled with the specific control of someone managing fear rather than the natural ease of someone who had nothing to fear. "Ms. Whitaker," the voice said. "I think you know who this is." She did. The voice matched the face she had met twice at 2 separate events on 2 separate occasions, when she had shaken a hand and accepted a compliment about her husband's good taste, and filed the interaction in the back of her mind without knowing why. The name from the payment log, calling her personally. She gestured to Reyes, who was already moving, already reaching for her own phone, already signaling to park in the doorway. "I know who this is," Lauren said. Her voice was entirely steady. "I want you to understand something," the voice said. "I want you to understand that the picture being assembled is not accurate. In terms of my involvement, I was used, Ms. Whitaker, the way you were used. Romano is a man who exploits proximity. I was proximate to his operations in ways I was not fully aware of and could not fully control." Lauren listened. She kept her face neutral and her voice measured because Reyes was in the room, and she understood without being told that this call had just become something that needed to be handled with precision. "I appreciate you telling me that," Lauren said. "I'm telling you because you're the one who started this," the voice said, and now beneath the control there was something with an edge to it, not quite anger, but pressure. The pressure of a very powerful man who is unaccustomed to being in a position where his options are narrowing. "You went to the federal office. You brought them what you had. I understand why. I understand the marriage you were trying to leave, but what you've set in motion has consequences that reach beyond Vincent Romano." "I'm aware of that," Lauren said. "I don't think you fully understand the scope of those consequences." "With respect," Lauren said quietly, "I think I understand the scope considerably better than you're assuming." She paused. "I've spent 8 years being underestimated by people who believed that what they saw on the surface was all there was to me. I'd prefer not to spend this conversation the same way." A silence. Then, with a different quality, something that recognized it had miscalculated, "What is it that you want, Ms. Whitaker?" "I want what I've always wanted," Lauren said. "The truth to be on record, all of it, without exceptions made for people who are powerful enough to expect exceptions." She paused one final time. "I don't think there's anything else for us to discuss." She ended the call. Reyes was on her phone before Lauren had set hers down. Park was already out the door. The conference room had that quality again, the quality of motion becoming irreversible, of things that cannot be taken back, having just occurred. David Carter looked at Lauren across the table. "He called you directly," David said. "He bypassed every intermediary and called you personally. Do you understand what that means?" "It means he's afraid," Lauren said. "It means you are the thing he's most afraid of," David said. "Not the federal case, not Reyes, not the forensic accountants or the legal machinery. You, specifically. Because you're the one who saw him clearly and chose to do something about it." Lauren thought about Vincent's note one more time. She will look and never see. She loves too completely to look clearly. She thought about how wrong he had been. She thought about how long she had allowed herself to look just softly enough that he could believe he was right. And she thought about this morning, 4:17, the click of the apartment door, the cold pre-dawn air, the suitcase with 3 things inside it that mattered, and a life's worth of things left behind that hadn't. She had known even then. Not every detail, not the full scope, not the name in the payment log or the file behind the file or the call she would receive at 6 in the evening from a man whose voice carried the specific fear of someone watching his world narrow. But she had known the essential thing, that she had always been more than he believed, that patience had never been passivity, that 8 years of being underestimated had produced not a woman diminished, but a woman in possession of everything she needed. Reyes came back into the conference room at 6:44. Her face was different again, carrying something that was going to require words, and Lauren could see Reyes choosing those words carefully before she began. "The call has been flagged," Reyes said. "Intercepted and logged. His counsel is already contacting our office. He's reversing his earlier position." She sat down. "He's offering cooperation." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had happened since 4:17 in the morning, of every document and photograph and careful, patient act of attention that had led to this room, this table, this moment. "They're all cooperating now," David said quietly. "Once the first one moves, they all move." "Not all," Reyes said. "Vincent hasn't. Vincent is still requesting Hess, who is now unavailable to him for reasons he's beginning to understand. Vincent is sitting in a federal holding room, and for possibly the first time in his adult life, he is completely without the infrastructure he built to keep himself safe." She looked at Lauren. "He asked again who gave us the address." "And," Lauren said. "And this time we told him," Reyes said simply. Lauren thought about how Vincent Romano would receive that information. The man who had written in his own handwriting that she loved too completely to look clearly. The man who had called her a toy. The man who had grabbed her wrist in a crowded room and left bruises she had pressed her fingers against in a cab at 4 in the morning just to confirm they were real. She thought about what it would cost him to fully understand who had dismantled his empire. Not a rival, not a government agency that had been building a case from the outside for years, not a political enemy or a business competitor or anyone he had ever cataloged as a threat. His wife, the woman he had chosen specifically because he believed she could be managed through love. The woman who had in fact loved him genuinely, completely, in the way he had counted on and underestimated simultaneously, and who had also, without contradiction, been paying attention every single day of every single year building without fully knowing she was building the architecture of his undoing. "Good," Lauren said, and she meant it in every direction at once. The night after Vincent Romano was taken into federal custody, Lauren Whitaker slept for 11 hours in a hotel room she paid for in cash under a name that was not hers, in a city that had known her for 8 years as someone else's wife. She did not dream. Or if she did not remember the dreams when she woke, only the particular quality of the sleep itself, which was different from any sleep she had managed in longer than she could accurately trace. Not the sleep of someone who had escaped, the sleep of someone who had at last stopped running from something and started moving toward something else, and whose body understood the difference even before her mind had fully caught up. She woke at 7:43 and lay still for a moment, taking inventory the way she had learned to do in the years of her marriage, checking the temperature of the room, the sounds outside the door, the general landscape of what the day required. The inventory came back quiet. No obligations she had not chosen. No performance required of her before she was ready to perform it. No version of herself she needed to assemble for someone else's benefit before she had assembled it for her own. She ordered coffee from room service. She sat with it at the small desk by the window and opened her laptop and read the news. The story had broken overnight, not in the way of a slow-building disclosure, but in the way of something that had been held under pressure for a long time and finally released all at once. Front page of 3 papers, lead story on 2 major networks. The kind of coverage that arrives when a story has both the gravity of institutional corruption and the human immediacy of a marriage, a betrayal, a woman who disappeared at dawn, carrying the evidence that would bring down an empire. Her name was in it. Exactly as Reyes had said it would be, as witness as the person who had brought forward the primary evidence, as the woman whose 8 years of careful, unintentional, professionally trained attention had produced the documentation that a federal investigation had been unable to obtain from the outside. The framing was precise the way Reyes's language was always precise. Lauren Whitaker was not described as a victim. She was described as the source. She read every article twice. She was looking for inaccuracies, for the particular distortions that journalism sometimes introduced into complex stories, simplifications, dramatic flattening the conversion of nuance into narrative convenience. She found less of it than she expected. The reporting was careful. Someone had been careful with the reporters, which meant Reyes had managed the disclosure the way she managed everything methodically, with complete awareness of what each piece of information would do once it was in the world. Her phone, the prepaid which she was still using, buzzed with a text from David Carter. "How are you?" She thought about the question honestly, the way she had been trying to think about everything since 4:17 yesterday morning, which felt simultaneously like 5 years ago, and like something that was still happening in present tense. "Still figuring that out," she typed back. "But okay, genuinely okay." His response came quickly. "Reyes wants to meet at 10. Not urgent, procedural. But she says there's something she wants to tell you in person rather than through channels." Lauren looked at the time. 8:14. "I'll be there," she typed. She showered and dressed and thought while she did both about the shape of what came next. This was new territory in a specific way, not the territory of uncertainty which she had lived in before, but the territory of self-determined uncertainty. The kind where the unknown ahead of you is unknown, because you have not yet decided what it will be, rather than unknown because someone else is deciding, and you are waiting to find out what they've chosen. That distinction, she thought, was everything. She arrived at the Federal Building at 9:52. Park met her in the lobby. He had a quality this morning that was slightly different from the contained professionalism of the day before, something warmer, less managed, as if the successful conclusion of something long and difficult had relaxed a muscle he had been holding tense for a very long time. "Good morning, Ms. Whitaker," he said. "Good morning," Lauren said. "You look like someone who slept." He almost smiled. 6 hours, first time in 2 weeks. Reyes was in the same conference room, which felt different this morning, not the pressurized space of an active operation, but something quieter, more settled. She stood when Lauren came in, which she had not done the day before, and Lauren understood the shift in protocol as a kind of acknowledgement, not formal, just human. "Sit down," Reyes said. "Coffee." "Please," Lauren said. Reyes poured. She sat. She took a moment in her characteristic way, organizing what she wanted to say into its correct sequence before she began. "Hess's cooperation has been more extensive than we anticipated," she said. "He came in this morning with his attorney and provided 3 hours of testimony. He's been keeping records of his own, not out of any ethical impulse, I want to be clear about that, but as personal insurance. The same way Vincent kept leverage on him, Hess maintained documentation that he believed would protect him if things went wrong." She paused. "What Hess had combined with what you brought, combined with what Patricia Shan has been building from the financial side, we now have a case that my supervisor described this morning, and I'm quoting directly, as the most complete corruption prosecution this office has put together in 15 years. Lauren held her coffee cup. "And Vincent, still not cooperating," Reyes said. "He requested a new attorney this morning, someone from outside New York, someone Hess hadn't touched. He's going to fight it." She met Lauren's eyes. "Which is his right, and which will not change the outcome given what we have. It will only extend the timeline." "How long?" "Trial, if he insists on one, could be 18 months to 2 years out, possibly more if his new counsel pursues every available delay." Reyes paused. "The evidence is not going anywhere. The case is not weakening. He can delay, but he cannot change where it ends." Lauren nodded. She had known this was likely. She had known it would not be fast, not clean, not the kind of resolution that fit into a single day. Justice, when it moved through institutional channels, moved at institutional speed, which was often infuriating and sometimes necessary, and always required the patience of people who understood that the outcome mattered more than the timeline. She had patience. She had demonstrated that already. "You said there was something you wanted to tell me in person," Lauren said. Reyes nodded. She set her cup down and looked at Lauren with the direct, undeflected attention that was one of her most distinctive qualities. "Yesterday evening after you left, I received a call from a colleague in Washington, someone I trust. She'd seen the story breaking and she wanted context on your role, not for any official purpose, just professional curiosity about how the evidence had been developed." Reyes paused. "I told her the outline. How long you'd been collecting what you'd collected, how you'd organized it. The fact that you'd done it without a clear end goal out of professional instinct, essentially, rather than deliberate strategy. Another pause. My colleague said something I want to pass on to you because I think it's accurate, and I think you should hear it from someone outside your own situation. Lauren waited. She said Reyes continued that in 26 years of federal prosecution work, the witnesses who make cases like this possible fall into two categories. The ones who see something terrible happening and look away because looking away is safer, and the ones who see it and can't stop looking even when looking costs them something, even when they haven't fully decided what they're going to do with what they see. She held Lauren's gaze. She said the second category is rare, genuinely rare, and that the people in it are never the ones who plan to be there. They're just the ones who couldn't make themselves stop paying attention. Lauren felt the words move through her with a weight that was not entirely comfortable, the weight of being seen accurately, which was different from the weight of being seen kindly and required a different kind of response. Tell your colleague thank you, Lauren said. I will, Reyes said, and then more quietly, what are you going to do now? The question was personal, not procedural. Lauren recognized the difference and accepted it as the genuine inquiry it was. I'm going to go back to work, Lauren said. My actual work, the work I set aside 8 years ago. She paused. Specifically, I want to focus on financial exploitation cases, the kind that target people who don't have the resources or the professional background to identify what's being done to them. Women in financial abuse situations, elderly people in investment fraud situations, people who are being systematically deceived by someone they trust. She paused again. I've spent 8 years inside that kind of situation from the inside. I understand it from a vantage point that most investigators don't have. I want to use that. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. That's a significant undertaking. I know, Lauren said. I've been thinking about it since about 3 a.m. yesterday, which was before I'd fully processed what was happening, so the idea has had time to settle. She almost smiled. It's still there, which means it's probably real. You'll be rebuilding a practice from scratch, Reyes said. Not as a discouragement, as an acknowledgement of the practical reality. I've rebuilt things before, Lauren said. I built an entire life from scratch 8 years ago around someone else's needs. I'm reasonably confident I can build one around my own. Reyes nodded. If your work ever intersects with ours, and given your background, I think it will, I'd like to establish a working relationship, formal or informal, depending on what the case requires. I'd like that too, Lauren said. They talked for another 40 minutes. Procedural things, the logistics of Lauren's role as the federal case moved forward, the timeline of her testimony, the legal separation from Vincent's assets, and the independent financial standing she would need to establish, which Reyes's office could support in ways that would accelerate what would otherwise take years. Lauren asked precise questions and received precise answers, and took notes in the compact shorthand that had always been hers, the shorthand from before Vincent, from the years when she had been most fully and unambiguously herself. Before she left, Reyes said one more thing. The divorce strategy, she said. The file Vincent's lawyers prepared. The narrative about financial dependence and emotional instability. She paused. It will be part of the public record. It will be reported. I want you to be prepared for the fact that some of the language in those documents, the specific characterizations they intended to use against you, will become publicly visible. I know, Lauren said. Does that? Reyes started. No, Lauren said simply. It doesn't. I spent 8 years being told in various ways that my perception of things was unreliable, that I felt too much, that I was too dependent, too emotional, too attached to a version of things that didn't exist. Having that strategy exposed publicly, having it shown for what it was, a calculated legal mechanism designed to silence someone who knew too much. She stopped. That's not something I'm afraid of. That's actually something I want on the record. Because every woman who has ever been told that her version of events is unstable deserves to see what that accusation actually looks like when it's in writing and signed by lawyers. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll make sure the record is clear. Lauren left the federal building at 11:26 and stood on the sidewalk in the November air and breathed. Not dramatically. Just breathe the way you breathe when you have just set down something heavy that you have been carrying for a very long time, and your body needs a moment to relearn what it feels like to stand up straight without the weight. Her phone buzzed. Natalie. I just finished with Park. 3 hours. I told them everything. Lauren typed back, how do you feel? A pause. Then lighter. Terrified. But lighter. That sounds right, Lauren typed. Another pause. Lauren. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think we could talk sometime not about the case? Just talk. Lauren looked at the text for a long moment. Natalie Brooks had been complicit in things Lauren had been harmed by. She had also, when it mattered, called Lauren at 4:30 in the morning and told her the truth and walked out of Vincent Romano's apartment without looking back. Neither of those things canceled the other. Both of them were real. Yes, Lauren typed. Not right now, but yes. She put the phone in her pocket and started walking. She did not have a destination yet. She had a hotel room and a laptop and a prepaid phone and the beginning of a plan, which was more than she had started with at 4:17 yesterday morning and considerably more than she had needed. She thought about what it meant to start over. Not the romance of it, not the narrative of the phoenix, the triumphant second act, the woman who rises. She was tired of stories that converted real things into symbols. What she was thinking about was more specific and more practical, and in some ways more difficult than any symbol. She was thinking about the actual work of rebuilding a professional life from a standing start at 37 in a city where her name was now attached to a federal case in a field she had left 8 years ago and would have to re-enter with 8 years of absence to explain. She was thinking about office space and professional licensing and the particular exhaustion of starting things and the fact that she had nonetheless always been better at starting things than she had ever allowed herself to acknowledge, because in the years of her marriage, starting things on her own behalf had not been something Vincent had made space for. He had made space for her to start things on his behalf. She had been very good at that. She was about to discover how good she was at it when the things she was starting belonged entirely to herself. 3 weeks later, Lauren sat across from a woman named Carol Mendez in a borrowed conference room in a building on the east side that a friend had made available while Lauren finalized the lease on her own office. Carol was 54 years old and had been married for 22 years to a man who had, over the course of the previous 4 years, systematically moved joint assets into accounts she could not access, undermined her professional relationships with the people they knew in common, and told her repeatedly and with great apparent certainty that her understanding of their finances was simply not accurate, that she was misremembering that the anxiety she felt was a symptom of instability rather than a reasonable response to what was actually happening. Carol had found Lauren through an attorney who had read about the Romano case. She had called the number on Lauren's newly established website, a website that had gone live 11 days earlier, offering financial investigation services with a specific focus on cases involving economic abuse and hidden asset recovery. And she had left a voicemail that was so careful, so measured, so exhausted, with the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been told so many times that her perception is wrong, that she has begun to preemptively apologize for having perceptions at all, that Lauren had called her back within the hour. Now Carol sat across from her and said in the careful voice of someone who had rehearsed this and was still afraid of how it would sound, I know it might seem like I'm overreacting. My husband says I have a tendency to... Stop, Lauren said, gently but completely. I need you to stop right there. Carol stopped. She looked at Lauren with the cautious attention of someone who has learned to interpret interruption as incoming dismissal. I don't want to hear what your husband says about your perceptions, Lauren said. I want to hear what you've seen, what you've noticed, what you've documented if you've documented anything, and if you haven't, I want to hear why you haven't been able to. She leaned forward. I'm going to tell you something that I want you to hold on to for the duration of this conversation. What you've observed about your own life is not a symptom of instability. It is data. And data properly examined tells the truth, regardless of who has been telling you otherwise. Carol looked at her. Her eyes filled. She did not cry. She pulled it back with the practiced reflex of a woman who has learned that tears are used against her. But the filling was there, the recognition of something in Lauren's words that matched something Carol had been carrying alone in a place she hadn't known how to describe. My father used to say something like that, Carol said quietly. Tell me what you've noticed, Lauren said. and Carol told her. She talked for an hour and 20 minutes, and Lauren listened the way she had always listened, completely, with the full weight of her attention, cataloging and connecting and filing and understanding, not just what was being said, but what it meant, what it indicated, what the pattern of it revealed about a situation that a man had spent 4 years carefully constructing to be invisible from the inside. Lauren had been invisible from the inside. She knew every room of that particular house. When Carol finished, Lauren said, "You're not overreacting. What you've described is a textbook asset concealment strategy. Specific, deliberate, executed by someone who understood that the most effective way to hide financial behavior from a spouse is to simultaneously undermine the spouse's confidence in their own observation." She paused. "I can help you. Not just legally, that will come, and I have referrals for you. I mean, I can help you find what's been hidden, which, based on what you've told me, is considerable." Carol was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I kept thinking I was wrong. I kept thinking if I just looked more carefully, if I just paid more attention." "You were paying attention," Lauren said. "That's exactly why he worked so hard to tell you that you weren't." She held Carol's gaze. "The people who are most dangerous to that kind of strategy are the ones who won't stop looking. He knew that about you, so he spent 4 years trying to make you stop trusting what you saw." "It almost worked," Carol said. "Almost," Lauren said. The word sat between them with a particular weight, the weight of the territory between almost and completely, which was the territory where things could still be changed. 2 months after that meeting, Lauren stood in her own office, a real office, not borrowed space, with her name on the door, in clean sans serif letters that she had chosen herself, and read an email from Reyes. The trial date had been set, 14 months out. Vincent's new counsel had exhausted the available delay mechanisms faster than anyone had anticipated, possibly because the evidence against him was so comprehensively organized that each attempt at delay had collapsed under its own weight. 14 months. Lauren read the date and held it in her mind for a moment, placing it in the future, like a marker, a point toward which things were moving with the slow, inexorable momentum of institutional accountability. She would testify. She had known she would. She had been preparing for it in the specific way she prepared for things now, methodically, without allowing the emotional weight of it to prevent the practical preparation, but also without pretending the emotional weight wasn't there. She would sit in a federal courtroom and tell the truth about 8 years of marriage to Vincent Romano. She would describe the documents she collected and how she collected them and what they meant. She would be cross-examined by a very good lawyer who had been hired specifically to make her look unreliable, because that had always been the plan that was now itself part of the evidence. She was not afraid of any of it. That was the thing she returned to most often in the months since that first morning when she had taken inventory and found herself still standing. She had expected fear, had braced for it, assumed it would arrive in waves in the quiet hours, the specific fear of a woman who has dismantled her own life and must now live in the space where the dismantling happened. But what arrived instead was something different, something quieter and more durable. Not the absence of difficulty. The work was hard, the adjustment was real, the grief was genuine, and visited her at unexpected moments with its full weight, and she did not try to make it smaller than it was. But underneath the difficulty was something she had not felt in 8 years, the specific sustaining solidity of a woman who knows exactly who she is and has stopped negotiating that knowledge for anyone else's comfort. She had been negotiating it for a very long time. She was done. Her office phone rang. Her assistant, a young woman named Grace, who had found Lauren through the website and whose precision and observational intelligence reminded Lauren in the best possible way of herself, at 26, said through the intercom, "Ms. Whitaker, your 3 o'clock is here, a new referral from the Mendez case." Carol Mendez had referred 3 people in 2 months. Lauren had taken all 3 cases. "Give me 2 minutes," Lauren said. "And Grace, can you start a file same format as the others?" "Already started," Grace said. Lauren almost smiled. "Of course it is," she said. "Send her in." She stood up from her desk and straightened her jacket and prepared to meet another woman who had been told too many times, and by someone who should have known better, that the thing she saw clearly was not as clear as she believed. Lauren knew what to do with women like that. She knew specifically and experientially, and without any remaining doubt, what it meant to be told your perception is the problem, to have your clarity systematically undermined by someone who needed you blind to survive. She knew what it cost. She knew how long it took to trust your own eyes again. She also knew that it was possible. She knew that with the right support, the right information, and someone in your corner who had been in the same room and refused to stop looking, it was entirely concretely possible to find your way back to yourself. That was what she offered. Not rescue. She had learned to be precise about this, because women who had been controlled did not need to be rescued. They needed to be resourced. She offered information. She offered skill. She offered the particular combination of professional training and personal experience that allowed her to see quickly and clearly what someone else had worked very hard to make invisible. She walked to the door and opened it. The woman on the other side was 51 years old, well-dressed in the careful way of someone who has learned that appearance functions as armor, with the particular stillness in her hands of a person managing anxiety through force of will. She looked at Lauren, and in her expression was the thing Lauren had seen in Carol's expression, and in the expression of every woman who had walked through this door, since the particular mixture of hope and preemptive apology of needing help and being afraid that needing help would be used against her. "Ms. Whitaker," the woman said. "Yes," Lauren said. "Please come in. I'm glad you called." And she meant it. She meant it the way she meant everything now, completely without performance, without the careful management of what she showed and what she withheld. She meant it with the full, uncomplicated sincerity of a woman who had come back to herself from a very long distance and understood in the irreversible way of someone who has learned something through living it, rather than reading it exactly what she was doing and why it mattered. Vincent Romano had called her a toy. He had said toys got replaced. I was sitting in federal custody, awaiting a trial that would be built in substantial part from the evidence his toy had collected, and the woman he had chosen to replace her with was cooperating with the prosecution, and the political figure whose name appeared in his payment log had entered a plea arrangement that his lawyers had described publicly as the most disadvantageous settlement in recent memory, and Gerald Hess had surrendered his law license and was facing charges of his own, and the empire that had taken 20 years to build had taken considerably less than 24 hours to begin collapsing from the inside out because of the one person Vincent had never considered dangerous. Lauren Whitaker closed her office door and sat down across from a woman who needed someone to believe what she had seen. And she listened. Because listening done completely and without agenda and without the need to control what you heard was not passivity. It was not weakness. It was not the behavior of someone who could be safely underestimated. It was the beginning of everything. Some women are silenced by the men who fear what they know. Some women are diminished by the hands that were supposed to hold them. Some women are told so many times and in so many careful ways that what they see is not real, that what they feel is not reliable, that who they are is not enough, and they begin almost without noticing to believe it. But some women keep looking anyway. Some women pay attention even when attention costs them something, even when they have not yet decided what they will do with what they see, even when the looking itself is the only act of resistance available to them. And when those women finally fully completely stop waiting to be underestimated, when they pick up the small suitcase and walk out the door at 4 a.m. and begin moving in the direction of everything they already know, there is no wall built high enough, no strategy sophisticated enough, no power concentrated enough to stop what comes next. Lauren Whitaker had been called a toy. She had answered by becoming the most consequential witness in a federal case that reshaped an entire criminal network, built a practice dedicated to finding the truth that powerful men worked hardest to hide, and walked into every room from that day forward as exactly and completely and unapologetically herself. She had not been a toy. She had never been a toy. She had been from the very beginning the woman who was going to win.